print in Revit, you need to find the print dialog box underneath the Applications menu. Now, the Applications menu is the big R that you see in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. And then down toward the bottom of the screen, there'll be Print. If you select on the word Print, it'll take you to the Print dialog box, or you can click on the word Print here on the menu that pops up on the side of the screen. From there, the Print dialog box will show up, and it'll give you the name of your default printer first. From here, you can pick on any of the printers that you have installed, including any PDF printers you might have installed on your computer. Once you have the right printer, come over here to where it has Properties, and if you select on Properties, you'll see a listing of all the properties associated with that printer. Now, these are Windows properties. They're printer properties. They're not actually Revit properties, which is why I'm not selecting on the Properties button myself. Everyone's printer driver properties are going to look a little bit different depending on the make and model and manufacturer of that printer. But one thing that'll be constant somewhere in those properties will be the size of the sheets that you can print to. So a little bit later on, we're going to be looking at the different size sheets that we can print to. The Windows printer properties, where this button is at, somewhere in there, depending on what your printer is, it'll say that it can print to this size sheet, maybe 11 by 17 or an 18 by 24 or a 30 by 42. And it'll take its information from that list. Now, if you want to print to a file, such as a PDF file, you can do that by putting a little check mark right here where it says Print to File. And when you do, if you have the right settings going on up to that point, you'll have a couple of different options available here underneath File. The first one is going to be combine multiple selected views and sheets into a single file. What this means is that you can print yourself a multi-sheet or a multi-page PDF file. Also, you can create separate files. What this means is that if you have multiple sheets selected, it will print multiple PDFs, each with its own file with its own unique name. And this is where you can specify what that name should be, and you can browse to the appropriate location for that. Now in this case, I do want to print to a printer, so I'm just going to clear out the checkbox there for Print to File. The next option is called Print Range, and currently it says Current Window. Now, current window means it'll print everything inside of the current window. Stay right here in this dialog box. Don't click on Close like what I'm about to do. I want to show you what the difference is, though, between current and visible. If I minimize this, or actually restore down this view, you can start to see that this floor plane is now getting cut off. If I pull this up a little bit more, it's getting cut off even a little bit more. Well, what is happening here inside of the print dialog box is that if we choose current window, it'll print everything, including the part that's getting cut off in this view. The next option is visible portion of current window. If it's visible portion as opposed to just current window, it'll only print what's visible in the view. So it won't print the entire window. It'll just print this spot that we can see right now. Next, there's an option here that says Selected Views and Sheets. If you pick on Selected Views and Sheets, there's a button that becomes available and it's called Select. Upon clicking on Select, you can now select which views that you want to be able to print, such as a drafting view, maybe a floor plan view, or a section view. And by putting a check mark next to those, it'll only print those that have the check mark. If you have it the way that you like it, maybe you'll want to save this so that in future sessions, you can come back and print the same set again. To do that, you can just move up here to where it says Save As, click on that, and then give it a name that you'll recognize. In this case, I kind of like Set 1, so I'm just going to leave it at that. And click on OK. We can now see that it says Set 1 here. So in the future, if we want to print these again, we can just click on Select, come up here, pick Set 1, and it'll print those that have a check mark again. From here, I'm going to click on OK. We can see it now says that it's going to print Set 1. It gives you the number of copies, whether or not you want to reverse the order that they print. But there's also an option here that's for settings, and this is probably the most important area, frankly, inside of this program. Here, if you select on Setup, there's an option down toward the bottom left-hand side called Zoom. As I was doing support on many different Revit issues, I would say that printing to the wrong scale or not getting the print to look exactly right is probably the number one thing that I ran into for beginners. What usually happens is that they don't change fit the page. If it's at fit the page, it will not print to scale. You might get lucky and print the scale, but most likely it'll be a few % off. If you wanted to print the scale, choose zoom and make 100% as being the size that you want to use. Paper placement, either center or offset from corner, kind of depends on your printing. My own rule of thumb is I usually do offset from corner and then tell it how far off the edge of the piece of paper that I want to print. And it's not uncommon for me to do zoom 100% and offset sort of in combination with one another. But if I just want something that's going to be on the piece of paper and it fits, then I'll usually do center and fit the page together. A couple of minutes ago, I mentioned the paper size and how underneath properties, that's where you're going to find those paper sizes based on settings of your plotter drivers. Here you have size, and these are those different sizes that have been made available from that driver. And you can pick whatever size you want to print to off of the list. There's a vector versus raster processing. Try vector first, usually that'll work. If stuff starts vanishing off of your sheet, such as certain letters disappear or line work starts to disappear, try raster processing instead. It might print better. Quality I usually leave on high. Colors, there's 3 different options. You either print in color, black lines, or grayscale. Black lines and grayscale print very similarly, and depending on your plotter, one might work a little bit better than the other. I usually try black lines first. If it looks good, I go with it. If it doesn't, then try grayscale. If that looks better, then use grayscale. Neither one of them is necessarily right, and I found it usually depends on that plotter and its settings as to which one's going to print the best. Finally, if there's going to be some extra stuff showing up in the plot, such as the crop boundaries, which are the boundaries around the outside of each view, or if you start to print and you realize that all of your elevation symbols or levels are printing off as being blue, there's a very good chance that one of these boxes in here has been checkmarked. So if you start seeing odd things plotting that usually don't plot, you may want to check here underneath options and see if one of those kinds of objects shows up down here. And I'm going to click on OK to that. All the settings would be in place. All you'd have to do is click on OK, and it will print based on the settings that you set up here in the print dialog box. Occasionally, you'll have the need to export out your Revit drawings in a format that people that are using other kinds of CAD software can leverage and use. To do this, you need to find the big R, which is the Applications menu in the upper left-hand side of the screen. Find the word Export, highlight over it, and then move over into this area. These are all different formats of kinds of files that you can export out. The kind I'd like to do today is going to be a CAD format and a DWG file. This is an Autocad drawing file. By the way, I want to point out that there's also a DXF option, which is sort of a generic drawing file. It's considered a drawing exchange format. And if for some odd reason the person you're trying to submit these drawings to does not take DWGs, almost everybody does, but if they don't, you may try a DXF. Another kind of file that it can do is DGN files. These are MicroStation files. So if you know a MicroStation user, you can export this out and have them be able to use this as well. Now, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and select on the DWG file. And this brings up the DWG export dialog box. And you'll find that the majority of these other file formats that you could export out to have a very similar dialog associated with them. The first thing I'd like to do is come over here to where it says Export, and we can see it says Current View and Sheet Only. This means that the current view that I have open is going to be the only one that it can export out. I don't really like this, and ultimately I will be picking In-Session View and Sheet Set, but I do want to mention that there is an option here and it says Set 1. Well, Set 1 isn't actually a default option. This is one of those plotting sets. So when you came in and set up your printing so that you only print out certain sheets, this will allow you to export out those sheets as DWG files in order to share them with other people. In this case, though, I just want to click on In-Session View Sheet Set. This will give us the Show and List option. And from here, I'm going to pick all views and sheets in the model. So this will give us a list of every view, every sheet that exists inside of this Revit project. And you can put check marks next to anything you want to print. If you want to print multiple things, just put multiple check marks. From there, I'm going to click on Next. I'm just going to leave it at the default, which is just the floor plan level 1. Where do you want to save it out to? You can choose whatever directory you'd like to put it in, then give it a name that seems appropriate for that kind of project. After that, there's an option here for files of type. AutoCAD in particular has many different file versions. Here it has AutoCAD 2000, 2004, 2007, 2010. What this means is you can export out that Revit information to that AutoCAD format. And then ultimately by clicking on OK, it'll create a DWG file named whatever you've named here, and then you can send those out. If it's more than one, you can send more than one out. Now there's one other thing that I wanted to show to you. To show that, I'm just going to click on cancel to this. I don't really want to export this out. There's a button right here that I kind of skipped over, and it's called Modify Export Setup. If you select on that, this is going to give you the Modify DWG DXF Export Setup dialog box. What it does is it has individual categories. Almost think of these as being layers from AutoCAD, except these are those Revit objects. Next to it, there's information called layer. That means that you're going to take that Revit object, export it out to that layer, and have that color. If you want to change the layer, you can click inside the dialog box. You can retype in a different layer name. You can type in a different color. But it's going to export out that information to that layer to that color. Also, after setting all this up, I do want to point out that there are export layer options right here. You can export out this information so that the layers are set up correctly. And then underneath that, there's an option there that says load layers from standards. You can save this information out so that you have your own standards file. So if you need to use this again and again and again, you can. Also, you could use one of these standards that come with it, and there's four major ones: the AIA standard, ISO standard, Singapore standard, and British standard. And if you pick on one of these instead, I'm just going to say yes to this. It will relabel all these layers and give those new color identities based on the one that you picked. Tell it, yes, it's okay to override the information. And even though we didn't see a major change there, it would have overridden the information associated with each of those objects and the appropriate layer. And I'm going to click on OK to that. So to export this out to DWG file, all you need to do is come up to the Applications menu, which is the big R, go to Export. You're going to export out to a DWG file, and then pick which drawings you want to export out, choosing which settings that you want to use to make that conversion from a Revit object to an AutoCAD layer. Click on Next to tell it what the name of this file should be, and then click on OK to export that out as a DWG file that you can then send off to whoever needs it.